Back in the late 2000s, it felt like every movie or movie franchise had a game. The Godfather, Star Wars, Scarface, plus a bunch of kids movies like Toy Story and Kung Fu Panda. It's almost like movie-based games have gone extinct. Superhero games are still being made, of course, mostly Marvel games at this point, but whatever happened to superhero games based on superhero movies based on comics? The entire Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy had their own video games. It's not like they were entirely accurate, but they were still loosely based on the movies. I mean, they got Tobey Maguire to voice Spider-Man.
I got the girl, and New York finally likes me.
You'd think today, with the entire film industry being oversaturated with Marvel slop, they'd at least give us a movie-accurate Avengers game or something. I'm just saying, we used to get movie games all the time. It didn't matter if they were crap, but it seems like there's one type of movie that has survived the drought of movie games, that being horror movies. Video games based on horror movies have existed since the Atari days and continue to get pumped out today. And no, I'm not talking about Ghostface in Mortal Kombat or all those killers in Dead by Daylight. I mean real, true to the movies horror games. Now, these games have ranged from absolute crap to fairly accurate in design and great fun. So let's begin with the old and work our way to the modern. As far as I can tell, Alien, released in 1982 for the Atari 2600, is the very first video game based on a horror movie. Even if that's not true, I mean, it might as well be. Plus, how much research do you really think I put into my videos? Anyway, Alien is of course inspired by the '79 film of the same name. I say inspired because it in no way has anything to do with what happens in the movies. In fact, if the name wasn't Alien, I doubt anyone would have been able to put two and two together. One of the greatest 70 movies and one of the worst game adaptations of all time. Perfectly balanced. I mean, if you couldn't already tell, this is just Pac-Man. Straight up, no hiding it, no disputes. Everything from the pellet collecting to the warp zone on the edges to the power-up that turns the aliens blue. I mean, have you no shame? The only differences are that you can use a flamethrower attack that will turn nearby enemies around and go into another direction, and instead of 4 ghosts, there's 3 aliens. That's literally it. But the flamethrower attack seems to be inconsistent, and honestly, the aliens don't seem to be headed towards me anyway. I think they just move randomly. It's not a terrible game, I guess, it's just a giant ripoff, and the sprites are actually pretty decent for what they're supposed to be, at least compared to other Atari titles. Which brings us to our next game, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1983. Hot take, I'm impressed. The game isn't good by any means, but being able to play as Leatherface himself going on a murder spree, that's pretty unique, even if Leatherface looks extremely inaccurate. Clearly, you can make things white and yellow. Why choose blue? And why make the chainsaw blue too? The basic idea is that you walk around and try to find people to attack, avoid fences, and deer bones? I don't know. For an Atari game, it's not the worst thing, even if the sprites aren't fantastic, but honestly, the wonky, uneven face mask on Leatherface isn't too bad. And the animation when the chainsaw moves is also pretty clever, so props to whoever designed these things. Unfortunately, the sound is abysmal. Just listen for yourself. These sounds should have been reserved for hell. If you ever find yourself playing this game, just put it on mute and play the movie soundtrack in the background, you'll have a better time. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't the last Atari game I'll look at today, no, because now we've come to Halloween, also from 1983. Alright, first of all, I appreciate the music, but I think it can stop now. I wouldn't mind it so much if it played occasionally, but every 5 seconds is just awful. This is perhaps the greatest horror movie theme ever, and while it's neat to hear it all Atari-fied, I can't help but feel like they would have been better off using a different song. Music aside, the game is also just not the best. You play as Laurie Strode, I assume, and you're babysitting a couple of kids who just wander around the house. Basically, you're trying to bring these screaming pieces of shit to safety, but half the time they don't want to follow you. You bring them to one of 2 rooms that have doors. The doors let you go upstairs and downstairs. I will say, I think that's cool. There's 2 floors. But what's not cool is the fact that Michael Myers has teleportation powers. This guy can appear anywhere at any time. I guess that's the spooky part, right? But sometimes it's like, go away. I can't have 10 seconds apiece? And with the music, oh man, you know, if Michael does catch you, your head straight up explodes. And you might think, no, he just cut it off. No. Now, if he cut it off, where did it go? It's not on the ground. It was blown up. That's the conclusion I've come to. The game gave Myers the ability of explosive touch. If he gets the kids, it looks like they were actually stabbed. Honestly, this is brutal and quite possibly the first time blood was used in a video game. Not even Texas Chainsaw Massacre was as violent as this. Also, the sprites are really good. Atari is all about using your imagination, and most of the time you really need to. But these are definitely human looking and animate fairly well. Though I'm not sure why Michael is smaller than Laurie. That's not right. Isn't he like 7 feet tall? Anyway, decent game, probably the most movie accurate out of the 3 so far, but it's also not great. Let's move on from the Atari. This may be a good time to mention that I'm not doing every game of this genre, nor am I covering every home console, just the more well-known ones. Jaws on the NES feels more like a chore than a game. The whole idea is that throughout the game you'll encounter Jaws, and you'll have the chance to fight him, but you're not going to be strong enough to finish him off in the given amount of time without upgrading your power, which you do by traveling to these little anchors across the map. During this journey you'll always be hitting something, which leads to this tedious space shooter style experience where you gotta kill stingrays and jellyfish for shells, you then use those shells to upgrade your power, you use your power to kill Jaws. It's kind of fun for the first 3-ish minutes, but afterwards it's just ridiculous. You know, it's not like you can skip the battle once you hit something like in Pokemon where you can run. And that's exactly what this feels like, by the way. Walking around in tall grass, hitting something every 2 seconds. Not to mention how easy it is, Jaws is perhaps the easiest final boss in history. So while the game isn't difficult, it's just boring and time consuming. Graphics are pretty good, I don't know, I won't be going back to this one. I gotta say, this is definitely the biggest game yet in terms of content and strategy. You play as one of 6 counselors, but you can switch between them. Your goal is to protect the kids of Camp Crystal Lake, while surviving Jason Voorhees. You do this by collecting weapons, defeating enemies, and defeating Jason himself if you encounter him. If you can beat Jason 3 times and at least 1 kid and 1 camp counselor is alive, you win. Different weapons have different stats. You know, some of them do more damage to enemies, while some do more damage to Jason. The enemies include crows, wolves, and zombies. Yeah, I don't remember that from the movie, but no matter how inaccurate the enemies may be, nothing compares to the design of Jason. I just... blue and purple? This is the same thing as Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the Atari. You're able to put the right colors in the game. Why wouldn't you just do that? The game has white and red and green and brown. What the hell is going on here? I can forgive Atari a little bit with how primitive it was, but this is the NES! This is next gen, an innovation in gaming, and you sour the entire experience with this purple abomination. What, did he just drink the Grimace shake? I mean, dude, bro, I can't make sense of this. I have a feeling the designers were making an entirely different game that was similar to Friday the 13th, but not quite. That would explain the zombies. And they had a purple and blue enemy already, but then they got the rights to F-13 and they just kind of changed some names here and there and changed the enemy to look more like Jason. But for some reason still left him as this color. I don't know, I don't get it. And the rest of the game looks pretty good. The opening title video is fantastic. Even the music is great. I also love the idea of switching between counselors and being in different parts of the map at once. It's almost like you control the movie. However, those indoor parts that attempt 3D, I find it hard to follow. You know, but maybe I'm just a moron. Anyway, let's end it there and move on to Jason's nemesis. Oh yeah. What do you want me to say about this? I mean, really, it's a platformer. It's got the typical late 80s, early 90s graphics. The enemies, like in Friday the 13th, are uninspired, though at least I can forgive this since you're dreaming, right? That's the whole point, right? You play as a guy who keeps falling asleep? Well, even when he's awake, there's still bats and zombies. It's pretty cool that the enemies change depending on whether you're awake or asleep, but there really shouldn't be this much danger when you're not even in the nightmare world. So you gotta go around and collect these bones, all while the sleep timer goes down. If you fall asleep, you end up in the dream world, which is almost better because you can use weapons here as opposed to just your bare hands. The coolest part of this game is hearing that classic lullaby right before Freddy shows up. Wait a minute. Freddy's TM coming? Okay. You gonna sneak a trademark in there? Okay, alright. That's almost as shameless as putting the title of the game on the screen at all times. Oh, never mind, they did that too. The problem with Freddy, though, is that he's so easy. Is he blind in the game? He just jumps around and swings his glove. Look, it's hard to screw up a platformer as long as the controls are stable enough, which they are in this game. Music is alright. Honestly, I have very few complaints gameplay-wise aside from some tediousness and repetition, but it's the NES. That's like the cherry on top, and I think we've seen enough of this console anyway. It's time for the SNES. And before you say, hey, what about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? That one's definitely more based on the 1880s book rather than the 1940s movie. And as far as the SNES goes, I think I'm gonna make this a 2-part, maybe even 3-part series. So that's all from me. Good night.